Hello, Russ. We're back again.
Fractal University. Greetings, tribe. We're always here to help you expand to the next dimension. Today's topic is going to be about understanding the next dimensions and how we can ground them with our Dean Headmaster, Dan Winter. Let's rock and roll.
Thank you, Russ. Glad you're here. Russ is our shaman on the spot here and bringing us to context and grounding. Yes, so today's title is Understanding the Next Dimension, both electrically and spiritually. Many people, actually tens of thousands, have seen my earlier lectures on the meaning of ascension, and this is related in an extension. We hope to make it very practical, and this in the second part of this, we have a wonderful series of visuals. So, what is the context here? Well, the context here is every other sort of spiritual teacher on the planet is continually talking about, well, they're in the third dimension, they're in the fourth dimension, and have you been to the fifth dimension yet? And, every single woo-woo on the planet tells you got to be in the next dimension. And your science teacher from high school is going, oh shit, this doesn't mean crap. Like, what the hell do they mean by being in the next dimension? Or any physics professor. I mean, where is the science lesson here? And if we got the science lesson, maybe we could do it better.
Agreed, agreed. Everybody's stuck in such a low realm that we need to expand that.
Yeah. And so if our language could embrace real electrical understanding, measurable, then we can, for example, if we knew the harmonics of the next dimension, we could implode and get there. That's the context. So what, in a conventional sense, the number of dimensions generally means the number of axes of spin superposed. So for example, in the cube, which you can barely see at the center of here, in the cube at the center here, which is then tetracube tilted into this pentodeca, in the cube, you literally have, it's thought of as being three dimensions, primarily because it refers to three axes of spin. And actually, there's one little visual I'm going to start with here. So in the history of what's called phase conjugation, lasers were arranged into a cube to implode and conjugate and make the first time reversal and negentropy that physics has ever measured. So a cube is where the arrangement of vortex into a cube is where physics discovered self-organization, time reversal by phase conjugating lasers, by setting them up into a precisely aligned cube, so that when the lasers met and mutually annihilated or imploded, they would create that magic spot at the center from which would bounce the other laser, which would bounce off that magic center and bounce backward in time and bounce into self-organization. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, the first thing to understand is conventional scientists could not really tell you how that works. They don't know. What they could tell you is at the center where the lasers do meet, you need what's called a super dielectric or a phase conjugate mirror, typically barium strontium titanate, which is a media like the material that Nostradamus put on his scrying cup and the material, the black obsidian mirror that the Olmec used for ancestor phone calls, that super dielectric thin film phase conjugate mirror, the word super dielectric means something. It means this is a material within which charge distribution is efficient and conductive. In other words, capacitively, there's perfect permission to distribute charge. In other words, implosion is enabled. That's what the phase conjugate magic mirror.
How I can translate that is I'm able to have these thoughts, right? And I'm able to analyze one thought in different forms from the lower to the higher. I think that's what we're trying to get to right now.
Yes, that there's a kind of elevation here in the sense that think of those lasers that are meeting precisely in a cube, that where the laser beams meet, they form a vortex. And the nature of that vortex, we've always said, is two pine cones kissing noses. And for the pine cones to kiss noses, actually, for the vortex to implode into each other, that implosive compression called conjugation of phases,
Mm.
the media within which the meeting occurs has to be permissive. In other words, there has to be a very conductive media within which implosion is permitted. And then they go from the cube to the pent, which is to say the pine cones emerge into golden ratio pine cones and implode. And that's the secret here, that actually the phase conjugation is by golden ratio, which is enabled when they're in this permissive media. So what does this have to do with the next dimension? Well, the next little part of this story, we want to give some examples. And the classic example here is, the biggest Stargate or portal in this galaxy, by all reports, is the trapezium in Orion, which is the largest cube in this galaxy. The trapezium is a cube. We have some graphics later. So apparently, what's called Stargate in portal is the same principle of conjugation, but it's bigger, which is to say the pine cones that are kissing noses become very large. Now, this is important context because we know that most of the galaxy wars were over the big Stargate. On this planet, the big Stargate was called Uru Asa LM, Jerusalem, and the war is over the Stargate, obviously. In the galaxy, the Orion Wars were over. Actually, it was because Anu and Lil Yahweh's father got sucked into marrying the Draco that got the Draco Yahweh and Lil infesting our solar system for a couple thousand years because they tempted him with the bribe and said, we're going to give you the trapezium in Orion. Oh, so how did that Stargate work? Well, basically, the size of the vortex that implodes determines how many harmonics are superposed to implode into that array. And the number of harmonics is called the number of axes of rotation superposed, literally how many dimensions. So the number of dimensions there is the number of harmonics of rotation that can superpose in one array. For example, you take this cube and you rotate blink 5 times and you have it in a pentodeca. So the next dimension for a cube is obviously a pentodeca, where it goes from octave to golden ratio. Then you can stellate the dodeca, and eventually the array, which happens to be a longitudinal coherence array, which is how ancestor memory propagates, and what the next dimension is that array gets bigger and bigger. And to inhabit the larger array requires completing the process of that implosive compression. But what we mean specifically is, we've always said you inhabit an array in your brain. It's called the synapses, the net of fireflies. And then when you graduate from the small array inside your head to the bigger array, ancestor memory, heaven, lucid dreaming, collective unconscious, you're graduating to inhabit the larger array of the coherent longitudinal nodes of the Earth grid, ancestor memory, dreaming track, song lines. These are the compression nodes of that longitudinal array. So the bigger the array into which you can get centripetal is the number of dimensions you inhabit, but more specifically, it is the number of harmonics which are imploding and making you centripetal to longer and longer waves. Remember, the longer the waves of memory is pretty much the definition of soul. I mean, how big your memory is, the length of your memory. So next, we are going to take the example of DNA. But did you have any comment at that point, Russ? Or
No, not right now. I think you're explaining it beautifully.
yeah. So then in the slideshow, and we've talked about this for many years, the article is goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. We see, as we have measured, thanks to Glenn Ryan, that when the harmonics of your heart, and the harmonics of the heart, called harmonic inclusiveness, is the measurement, the fastest way to measure your immune system. How harmonic inclusive is your heart? And when your heart harmonics becomes inclusive and the cascade becomes coherent, we've measured, thanks to Glenn Ryan, that the recursive braiding of the DNA from thread to string to rope to very fat rope 7 times. This is measurable. the phonon waves, the longer waves of sound, guide the cascade of the braiding in DNA to the point of recursive implosion, making the pine cones kiss noses. And when the DNA braids the braid of the braid on the braid, which is literally the presence of bliss, that implosion, that fusion process.
So explain that. What is pine cones kissing noses?
Well, physics is quite clear. The universe is only made of vortex. There's very few physicists would say there's anything else in the universe but vortex. That's what the world is made of. It's called string theory wormholes. So vortex is what physics is made of, period. No one disagrees. And when those vortex get together, because they don't want to die, the only thing that makes them sustainable is when the vortex kiss noses and implodes, because then that creates the first centripetal force, that gaining of energy during collapse, called charge collapse, called implosion, that creates negentropy and life and consciousness and gravity. That ability to gain energy during collapse only happens when pine cones kiss noses accurately using golden ratio, called PlanckFire.com. So what we're talking about when the DNA braids recursively in the presence of bliss is literally learning to gain energy during collapse. And for example, the physics of bliss, that radiance, happens because during bliss, you inhabit successful compression. The magnetic lines have lined up, the emotions have lined up, the stars have lined up, your breath has lined up, your spine harmonics have lined up, your brainwave harmonics lined up, all by golden ratio times Planck, by the way, enabling the implosive compression, which enables you to gain energy during collapse. And when that collapse is effective, then the order, just like a rose forming, first there's compression, then there's radiance. And the radiance is defined electrically by the fact that after the compression, the transverse component of the electromagnetic, after the implosion, is squeezed out the nozzle of the pine cone squirt gun, emerging then only as coherent longitudinal EMF called the Ba from the Ka, the rainbow light body, the Kesjan body, literally the physics of soul.com. So what enabled you to get there, to implode and inhabit that bigger array, was the more harmonics in the pine cone that was imploding, basically, the number of dimensions you lived in. Now, the very important point here is that when you spin a cube into a dodeca, the only way you can do it, get to that next dimension, is golden ratio. And then when you braid the dodeca down a helix, and that is the map of DNA, is a dodeca ratcheting down a helix. That's what DNA is. That is also golden ratio. And then when you braid the braid of the braid on the braid, that is also golden ratio. Always because only golden ratio enables successful recursive wave interference or implosive compression. So that golden ratio fractal solution of compression is the solution to almost every problem of physics. If you know the solution of compression, as we've always said, then you understand alchemy, then you understand spirit, then you understand soul, you understand immortality, and you understand going to the next dimension, if you understand non-destructive compression. So the point is that the harmonics that are superposed can only be golden ratio to enable that implosive compression. And the only thing we ever meant by going to the next dimension was your aura, which is the plasma of your aura, is the only thing about you, which is immortal, by the way, can inhabit a larger array, get centripetal in a bigger array, sometimes called Christos, the Christ principle, the crystallization of the centripetal force. And so the bigger the number of harmonics that are imploding, the number of dimensions, and they have to be by golden ratio, the bigger the array you can get centripetal into and inhabit in the increasing size of the longitudinal array. Go ahead, Russ. Sorry. Yes?
Yeah. So to make that charge collapse, to inhabit the array, how would we explain this in layman's terms? This is where the love point is. This is you feel that when you fall in love, when you enjoy the work you do or the movements that you make. I
Yeah.
think
Well, we've been talking about the array for, for many, many years, and that, which means, you need access to the array, which means a magnetic line cross is very helpful. Access to a sacred site is helpful. Access to nature where magnetic lines can cross is helpful. Whereas metal buildings in big cities are the opposite. That is the definition of hell, because you don't get access to the array. And the golden ratio cascade of the Schumann harmonics, which is the perfect phase conjugate pump wave, which gets you into the array and which define the brainwave harmonics of bliss, isn't available in metal buildings in ugly cities with electrosmog and dead air. So access to the array determines whether you unpack into the array, which is going to the next dimension. And so we can always measure when you get there, because your breath harmonics, your spine liquid pump harmonics, your brainwave harmonics, and the magnetic lines of the cross point that you're sitting on. And also, this is the physics of astrology, quite literally. The gravity waves, which we now are longitudinal EMF, they have to cross constructively. Actually, this is the only real physics of astrology as well.
Yeah. The power and conjugation points.
Yeah. So it explains, for example, why Agnihotra works at sunrise and sunset, and bliss works better at sunrise, and Agnihotra and bliss work better at solstice and equinox. These are all the cubic array of four-wave mixing enabled, which is why, you need things to line up, and you can plan electrically for bliss moments, for birth moments, for death moments, because that's the place and time where you'll have access to the array. And as well that time it's not bent. This is crude and stupid language. Time is only a name for relative spin rate. That's the only thing it's a name for. And that obviously spin rate can increase as you implode down closer to the center of the vortex nose cone, where quote unquote time speed ups only because rotation speeds up, only because implosion is enabled. So that's why when you accelerate, your aging speeds up only because spin rate speeds up, which is the only definition of time. So this business of time is the next dimension is a bit crude, because time is only a name for relative spin rate. And remember, spin rate, when charge enters into rotation, the inertia of that rotation is the only origin and definition of mass, and the period of that rotation is the only origin and definition of time. So this gives you a very powerful unified way of thinking, and that now you can see your spiritual progress is literally a name for this perfect phase conjugate implosion. We just published at pyramidwirelesspower.com a beautiful new picture of perfect phase conjugation, that the harmonics we measured in Sam's Bosnian pyramid, for example, is exactly the perfect phase conjugate pump wave, which is PlanckFire.com slightly modulated because of the fact that the Earth's Schumann harmonics would theoretically perfect at 7.29 hertz, but Thoth Enke and his team, who spent probably 1 million years planning for this to get the Earth's harmonic Schumann cascade into a perfect phase conjugate pump wave, the only definition of why pyramids work, for example, that they didn't get it quite right. They got the Schumann cascade at 7.83 hertz instead of 7.29. So if you retune PlanckFire.com from 7.29 theoretical to 7.83 actual, and then redo that cascade, it goes from 7.83 then instead of 50 to 53. And that harmonic cascade defines what we measure at all the pyramids, who are using this perfected phase conjugate pump wave to convert the transverse into the coherent longitudinal EMF, whose propagation is the only possibility and definition of global wireless power, all at pyramidwirelesspower.com. So it's all about inhabiting that array. And incidentally, that perfected phase conjugate pump wave harmonic series, newly published at pyramidwirelesspower.com, is the only definition of the exact harmonic cascade we use for every one of our technologies. Flameandmind.com, EEG, piezofire.com, therify.net, plasmafire.com. We all use only that same exact implosive cascade, because that is the charge collapse that enables gaining energy during collapse, which is the cause of Leibniz entropy and all the fun stuff. Yes, Russ.
So there's something I've noticed I've been speaking to a lot of people about right now, and it's the fact that when you are having fun, time flies. right? That means that when you hold a higher vibration, when you're able to access these higher vibrations, you step out of time and your power starts forming, constructing, construction. So with that said, that is the goal for the lower dimensions. When we speak about actually stepping out of time, also it has to inhabit your breath, the water you drink, the location you are at, and accessing these portals, accessing these gates that
And that's actually a useful language in the sense that when you say someone says you're out of time, it would be more accurate if you now understand what time is, which is relative spin rate. So actually, when your brainwave harmonics and your spine liquid pump harmonics and your breath harmonics and your magnetic line harmonics all get this perfect phase conjugate pump wave going, what happens is, as you're embedding in that larger and larger array called bliss or going to the next dimension, actually what's happening is the harmonic inclusiveness goes toward infinite, meaning that potentially more spins become present and resonant. In other words, you're inhabiting more axes of spin. Therefore, it isn't that you're out of time. No, no, no. It's that you're embedded into all of time, or potentially moving toward embedding into more and more harmonics, which is the presence of time from the past, time from the future, that when all spins converge at the same point, as they say in the poetry, where many paths and errands meet. So I don't really think the term out of time is very helpful. I think the term timeless is a bit of a confusion also. No, the physics is exactly like at the moment of bliss and the moment of death, which they start the same way. You see your whole life pass for you in front of your eyes in about 2 seconds. That's called compression. The reason you have to do that compression well to have bliss or death or birth, actually, is because you have to get to the implosion center point to inhabit the array. So you're not out of time. You're not timeless. Wrong. No, what you are is present to all of time, to all of spin, or present to more and more of the harmonics of rotation, which is the only definition of time. So again, timeless isn't really very helpful as a term, and out of time isn't really very helpful. But when you inhabit the center of more and more spins, you're centripetal into a larger and larger array. And that is what bliss is. And that is what evolution is. That's what consciousness is. That's what going to the next dimension means. And you're literally more centripetal into the bigger array, the Christ principle.
so because of programming, a lot of people don't get what that means in terms of infinity, time, timeless. Their world is still, until they flip the world and they can get and actually have a feeling of bliss. A lot of conversations right now that I'm having with Kundalini and Christ consciousness and being Christic or crystallizing thoughts. This is what people are needing from my energy, and I feel that because of the programming, they aren't able to see the molecular structures that you're transcending right now. You're showing them, you're telling them, but they have to go through the processes
Yeah.
of programming in terms of
And
this is time. This
yeah,
is
we're just getting to the slideshow here, which may help a bit, but your point is very well taken. In fact, I have spoken to many dozens of audiences of physicists over my lifetime of teaching, actually, and I have learned that when you're talking to an audience of technical people, one of the first things that's useful to do is, okay, your audience of physicists, hello, we're going to have a conversation today. First thing we're going to do is everyone who remembers having a bliss experience, you sit over there. Everyone who doesn't remember having a bliss experience, you sit over there. This is a different category of audience. Absolutely. And you know what? It's really true that when you have your audiences of physicists in front of you, the part of that audience that's very aware that they've had a bliss experience, they don't actually need to be taught.
they have the access point.
That's right. That's exactly what we're saying is, hey, the only reason we're here to tell you about bliss is until you have your own regular source of bliss. And then, heck, you don't need teachers. Hell no. You got the array. I mean, the radio is there for you, man. You can embed in that array, close your eyes, and see at a distance and all the fun stuff. So once you have regular access to bliss experience, I'm unneeded and I'm happy about that. So, so yeah, the first step when you're speaking to an audience of this is divide the room. Those have had a bliss experience and remember it and you talk about it. And those who don't remember having a bliss experience, you sit over there and you need help. And so we're here to tell you that bliss, which is going to the next dimension, is real, it's actual, it's electrical, it's soul making, it's immortalizing, it's necessary, it's powerful, it's the way you get an immune system, it's the way you get to lucid dream and get through. And yes, we're actually only here to help people who haven't had bliss. People have regular access to bliss. Heck, they don't need us. No. they can do it, man. So the physics of bliss is only a gentle introduction, and we're here for the people who don't have regular access to bliss to urge you to try that hygiene. Okay. So now the last part of this lecture is the slideshow, and what slideshow is just really a way to make some more of this visual. And so this was this slideshow is called the Star Trek Future slideshow, and it starts with this idea, which is we've been teaching for over 30 years, that the map to where the heartbeat voltage comes from is a nest of imploding donuts, right? Which is to say, gaining energy during collapse. So when your 3-year-old says, Mommy, where does my heartbeat come from? I think it's important to have an answer, actually. And when psychophysiologists, I mean, Arthur T. Winfrey in this book, When Time Breaks Down, The Electrical Origins of Cardiac Arrhythmia, this is the picture, detailed study of where the heartbeats comes from. Obviously, the next time that dimple turns inside out, the heart is closer to implosion, gaining energy during charge collapse. And we've all taught that harmonic inclusiveness of the turning inside out recursively defines compassion. It does. I would turn myself inside out for you, darling, but it also defines bliss, that implosion. The ability to gain energy during charge collapse is so fundamental, it's the origin of your heartbeat. And so we've always done the animations about, if you look to the right here, this is a picture of a zygote about to invite in the local sperm. And the zygote says to the sperm, I would turn myself inside out for you, darling. I mean, the sperm delivers capacitance to the surface of the egg. And if that capacitance is sufficient, there is a dimpling, turning inside out recursive implosion, which is called insemination. I mean, implosion. I mean, fertilization. I mean, birth. So turning inside out is absolutely the first move you ever made. Well, so, and then there's a defense of this process that when the donut does turn inside out, that implosion will self-organize into 7 smaller toroids at exactly the phase angle of the 7 spins of the tetra, which becomes the origin of the Hebrew and the heart muscle and cubic self-organization in general, which is reflected here in the first word of Genesis, Bereshith, which is how a donut turns inside out, and the index of the shadows of the spiral on that donut turning inside out for the first time, Bereshith, meaning not in the beginning, but at first, in principle, the origin of thingness. So this gets us to where we're talking about that how the Pinecone's kiss gnosis is actually called phase conjugation. And that phase conjugation is actually a very detailed model electrically of the generalized physics of the cause and mechanism of perception. Our partner, Steve Lehar has written about phase conjugate origin of perception for many years. And so that became our fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. So conjugation, that implosion point at the center, is where the waves are sorted and imploded. And we call that perception. And later, we're going to see that your consciousness electrically is very simple. when anybody asks you as a physicist what consciousness is, you have a very specific answer. Consciousness is a name for the plasma vortex in the net of synapses, the net of fireflies inside your head. And when the plasma vortex develops a center, then you have vision. And the more accurate the vortex implosion at the dimpling point, the sharper your vision. And I've given many lectures on this at conferences on perception. For example, people who have therified plasma implosion conjugation experiences get sharper perception. It's very normal. So perception occurs. And as we know from the kids who see without their eyes are closed, they're having bliss experience, the brainwaves implode, we measure that. And suddenly they say, a vortex, a dimple occurred inside my head, and I could see through it like an eyeball. So your consciousness is absolutely a plasma vortex, which starts inside your head, but does not have to stay inside your head. So we have a very specific and clear physics of consciousness, a plasma vortex, which starts inside your head. But that plasma vortex absolutely can go outside your head, called lucid dreaming, remote viewing, astral travel, and taking memory through death. So if anybody wants to know what the physics of consciousness is and doesn't say it's a plasma vortex, they're wrong. It's very simple. And so the nature of this vortex is reflected in the electrical geometry of the pineal gland. And another very practical example is if you do the figure 8 infinity walk and observe and measure repeatedly, dyslexia disappears because you created the vortex. Hello, turning inside out recursively. It's called Infinity Walk, Deborah Laren Sunbeck. She's wonderful. And all you're doing is doing the figure 8 kinesthetically, the cross crawl, and the corpus callosum gets hot when you do the figure 8 infinity walk, and it pressurizes the vortex, and suddenly dyslexia disappeared. What a coincidence.
So I call it going quantum.
Yeah.
When you can hold a high charge so you have two hemispheres in your brain. When you can hold a high charge, the plasma builds between the two hemispheres.
Yep.
So some people call it gateways, a hemisync.
Yep. Exactly.
Corpus callosum. When you hold that high charge, when you can think in 7, 8, 9D, 10D, 16, 18D, whatever you want to physically in your dualistic mind perceive, when you can hold a high charge, that geometry
That's right.
will build your body.
Awareness.
That will be your layers of your tree of life.
You inhabit the lightning bolt, we say. It's where the density implodes. And that is, you're creating vision, you're creating embedding into a larger array. So this all started, almost 40 years ago, 30 years ago now, when Korotkov first measured golden ratio in brainwaves correlated to the moment kids could see without their eyes. And now we learn a lot later. This is flameinmind.com work, that when you have dissociation in brainwaves, the area of coherence is at the ears. When you have transcendence in brainwaves, the area of coherence is pineal crown, literally imploding vortex. And this even in the 1990s now, we knew Awakened Brain by Cade, the famous book. Here is golden ratio in brainwaves, which was their definition of bliss and transcendence, except they didn't know that this graph was actually a golden ratio cascade.
Yeah.
And this leads us then to something about the physics of clairvoyance, clairaudience. And we tell the story, we have many times. My friend at the time, Andrea Puharich, who became the inspiration for Star Trek, with his book with Phyllis Schlemmer, who first had the conversation with Enki Ea Tam Atun. But the point was that what Andrea was doing at that time, and there's all kinds of conversations about astral hygiene we're not going to do here, but the electrical engineering we are going to do. So what Andrea had developed was a mechanism for electrical stimulation of the facial nerves. Basically, he put a piezoelectric implosion, piezo capacitive harmonic into the bone near the ear, and deaf people started hearing regularly. But the cool coincidence was, oh, by the way, they started getting clairaudient. Hello, they had the voices of ancestors. So this is a very interesting. So the reason that Andrea Puharich, Only Planet of Choice, Phyllis Schlemmer, and the teachers of the Star Trek, Star Wars series The only reason they got the first call from Enki Eatam Atun, who told the writers of Star Trek, Star Wars, the story, was because actually Andrea Puharich was doing the physics of clairaudience, which is the piezo implosion necessary to couple with the longitudinal array, which we now know is the physics of clairaudience and clairvoyance. And so we take the same piezo implosion. And we were just talking about the harmonics of the perfect phase conjugate pump wave. And we feed that to an array, in this case, piezofire.com. And that's history. And we're having demand is incredible, and localized pain reduction, because implosion is obviously the opposite of pain, and implosion creates self-organization, healing. And we do that for piezofire.com. And here, the same harmonics we feed to plasmafire.com. So this is what with the physics of clairvoyance and clairaudience is also why how John Dee developed scrying, ancestor and spiritual communication, Andrea Puharich, and there's this conflict between Bentoff and Puharich, which I was involved in, but we're not going to do that story today. It's about astral hygiene, which is a simple summary is you need to be able to discriminate. And astral hygiene requires actually you have your own source of implosion for reference to know what is parasitic, for example. And so that the phase conjugate field is self-organizing in the electrical sense that from the Allison barium titanate land story, that the phase conjugate fields that have been generated by electrical engineering, they self-organize and they find each other. You know, lovers who are destined to be, they find each other because electrically there's something mutually attractive about their collective implosion potential. This is called self-organization. It was discovered with phase conjugate mirrors. And so this is the paper Allison barium titanate land, which is basically how unusual it is that these plasma fields then self-organize, appear to become self-aware. Examples of those super dielectrics, shungite, moldavite, Podkledenov, barium strontium titanate. So phase conjugate dielectrics, where the implosion happens, the media within which embedding into the array is possible. That's the magic stuff. That's what Podkledenov made gravity with. That's the magic insect skeletons. That's the coating on the face on Nostradamus' scrying cup. That's how the Olmec made ancestor phone calls. And then you make this big phase conjugator called Montauk, and you learn this is I published some of the articles about Michael Ash, the famous time empath at Montauk, which we have talked about previously in this series. Point being here, the point being, you don't really need to study the history story. It's fun, it's educational, but the physics principle you absolutely need to think about. And the physics principle that you absolutely need to think about is when you get to the center of that array, how do you steer? That's the principle. I suddenly am waking up inside my dream, and how do I steer? Oh, Michael Ash says, I'm imploding in this imploding capacitor, and how do I steer? Or Jodie Foster in the Dodeca movie Contact says, am I time traveling or is it a lucid dream? How do I steer?
Yeah.
So the ability to set your intent to control where the implosive center of that vortex is going, that is the inner muscle. And it's those teenagers who could lucid dream that they abducted for Montauk, and those are the same ones that the Greys and the Dracos abducted. Because guess what? That's what having a soul is. That's what going to the next dimension is, the ability to steer as you embed into that array. So this is our old animation of the dodeca non-destructive compression imploding from the movie Contact, and so embedding into that longer array. This is the phase conjugate mirror, the Olmec used for ancestor phone calls, the physics of phase conjugation optically. Why is that the physics of ancestor phone calls? Let's think about the physics of that array and understand. So the ancient apocalypse story is actually that Veracocha, Quetzalcoatl, Oneness, Osiris, even Zoroaster. These are actually all Enki Thoth Hermes, the same guy who designed the caduceus, which is the definition of phase conjugation. Hello, what are they trying to teach us? So John Dee actually used the scintillation point for scrying and ancestor phone calls. We've taught this in many classes before. This is just review. And as we mentioned before, the reason that Agnihotra works only at sunrise and sunset is because the right angles a cube in four-wave mixing, the sacred four directions, and your hair stands up just before sunset. I've been there. I was in Poland at the Agnihotra Institute. And sure enough, they're just about to light that plasma field, and they've timed it to the second of sunrise. And right there, my hair is just standing straight up. It's because perfect four-wave mixing enables phase conjugation. And the negentropy of Agnihotra, for example, is how the Bhopal survivors, and it's how the Nagasaki, Hiroshima, the ones who did Agnihotra, they made it. Hello, that's called phase conjugate plasma, negentropic self-organization. And the same does apply to what the stupa is, implosive capacitance, and actually also then if we look at the symmetry of successful death, the Heinrich-Clouvet form constants, the reason you're seeing specifically these geometries at the moment of death, goldenmean.info/immortality for all the pictures, is that you have to, the lattice rotates into the cobweb, into the spiral, and that four sequence of superposed rotations is the physics of the map of successful death, because to do the compression that gets you into the array, so the map to successful death is another good example of going to the next dimension by imploding, as was enabled when the sun lines up in the alto at Machu Picchu. Perfect place for birth or death or bliss. Implosion. In fact, it was called Intihuana's prism, which literally means fractal. So imploding, the access to the array is the point. And this, when that phonon implosion of the spine liquid pump implodes on the ventricle horns of the cavities and you get horny, I mean the ventricle horns crystallize from liquid to crystalline. The phonon array becomes longitudinal, the horns on Lucifer and the horns on Moses, indicating Kundalini going to completion, indicating ability to inhabit the array. And that's the physics of Kundalini, and that's an old story. goldenmean.info/Kundalini, all our documentaries. And even the phonon harmonics ringing in the ear, heard by meditators. Hello, check out the frequencies. Phase conjugate implosion, all at goldenmean.info/Kundalini. This is just our chart showing that octave harmonics maximize destructive interference and golden ratio harmonics maximize constructive interference, the solution to compression, therefore the solution to implosion, alchemy, and we have so many animations of this. You've all seen the animations, and just that the non-destructive compression really sucks. I mean, the soap bubble implodes because you can change scale without changing ratio, and that implosion is literally the ability. You couldn't get scale invariant in implosive if the dodeca wasn't all based on golden ratio. And that is the geometry of the universe. Nature magazine says the universe is dodeca. New Scientist says the universe is fractal. Well, guess what? They're both right. The reason golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics is because that's the only reason, that's the only way to stabilize gravity. And that's the smoking gun, that golden ratio fractality is the cause of gravity. That charge collapse, PlanckFire.com. So many of these are review animations. You've seen these pictures before. I wanted to get down here. So we saw the Ark of the Covenant being a mechanism to contain the plasma. Not only did it reduce radioactivity measurably, the plague of Azoth, but it actually stabilized making monoatomic gold, because you stabilize the gold atom in the monoatomic state with implosive capacitance. So not only was the Ark a device for containing radioactives, but it was an implosive capacitance to create gold powder. And literally the mercy seat was that implosive spark gap. And this is about the recursive implosion, which we measure when we apply plasma field to the blood, Therify.net in this case. Here's the before and after the declumping. Literally, we implode the blood. And suddenly, before on the left, it's all clumped up. On the right, much healthier blood. After plasma fire, Therify.net, the blood cells have declumped, derouleau. And that
So in a simple form, that's what earthing is right there.
that's what is, sorry?
Earthing.
Earthing, yes, exactly. That's a very good point. So in theory, if you put your bare feet in living cold water, this happens to your blood, for example, because you get access to implosion in the grid, like your body was hungering for the Schumann harmonics, or you were singing John Denver's song, "Life in a high rise makes you hungry for something you can't even see." Oh, what are you hungry for? Implosion in Schumann. So this is the dodeca phase conjugate electrical antenna from my friend Preston Nichols, which became the Montauk story, and that is that implosion about the Grail secrets. We're not going to play all the Grail, but you see what the Grail is. The Grail is the geometry of propagation into the array, which results from. That's what the Grail is, and it happens in the blood if
magnetic field donuts around the heart, so that nest
you have access to bliss. There's the radiance, and yes, it's a
pine cone through the speed of
it's
light.
Grail color.
Time intent creates the future, and revolving that spin path
I
to
made
0
that
point
animation
we get the Holy Grail, which has no
30 years
inside or
ago.
outside, solves the problem of separateness, contains, self-embeds the Sufi heart within heart, feminine reproductive organs, into that 3D fractal.
I think my voice was younger then. Yeah. And if you revolve that, you see it's a cup within a cup within a cup. So it's the only possible three-dimensional fractal. And people in the Therapy plasma field have said what they saw was, this is what they saw when they went. It's an amazing story. So here's other practical examples. You know, when they say that consciousness is in the microtubule, well, actually what they mean is phase conjugation is enabled where the microtubule cone pairs implode and conjugate. So it ain't just that the microtubule is the cause of consciousness. No, microtubule is the waveguide that enables phase conjugation, which then creates consciousness. And let's see. Oh yeah. So and we finalize here with just the DNA animation. So we were talking about the braid of the braid on the braid from thread to string to rope. Okay. And that braid on the braid principle is animated by golden ratio in the center, where the octave in the hex meets the pent and the golden ratio rectangle. And that's the zipper down the thread of DNA. And that's what braid on the braid recursively implodes in the presence of the phonon harmonics of human bliss. And these are from the early pictures, which inspired me from Ann Ting, my friend, Geometric Extensions of Consciousness, derived from Coxeter's work. The vertical increment of turn was golden ratio squared. The angle of turn was golden ratio, and the golden ratio cubed. So yes, vertical increment of turn, golden ratio. Horizontal increment of turn, golden ratio squared. Radius of turn, golden ratio cubed. Hello. Am I stepping a dodeca down a helix? So that process of enabling that braid where the plot thickens, I mean the DNA thickens, is the number of axes of spin symmetry superposed increasing. And that implosion is what radiates the coherent longitudinal, the physics of soul. And this is the mechanism biologically of going to the next dimension for sure. This is the mechanism where the phonon coherence triggers this implosive braiding, literally the physics of bliss, all in the Celtic knots. And here's the measurement Glenn Ryan made at my suggestion. Heart coherence on the left, before and after the amount of the enzyme responsible for the zipper of the braiding in DNA. This is the measurement that DNA responds to love, I mean coherent heart. I originally propagated the physics, the theory, and the measurement, and I suggested the work that then became the measurement with Glenn Ryan. So fractality from Mandelbrot and golden ratio, we're not going to do all the slides. This is more detail on Glenn Ryan's work. You can read part of that at goldenmean.info/Ryan. So this is the presence of the enzyme, which is the zipper before and after exposure to coherent heart in the DNA. That's the implosion. Here's the implosion at the brain waves, causing the same principle in the brain waves. Golden ratio harmonics, flameandmind.com. We're not going to do, yeah. And so this is the braid of the braid of the braid on the braid. It's not just the physics of heart rate variability defining immune health, but it's also a map to what's happening in your DNA, perfecting the branching of the fractal. And you've all seen these animations. So there's just 4 more images left to be done. So I like this. I just thought this is so fun. I didn't create this animation, but talk about the braid of the braid of the braid on the braid. I thought this was a wonderful. So again, this is all at goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. And we've talked many times about the dance of 7 veils that actually, with the DNA and the heart, is doing the dance of 7 veils. the 7-color map of the torus becoming the 7 layers of heart muscle, et cetera, et cetera. And here's golden ratio in DNA, implosion of DNA. Here's the DNA imploding into a torus, optical photomicrograph of DNA in a donut. So where this lecture is completing now, heart rate variability, fractality, the raising of the Jed, the Egyptian Jed, is the projection of the aura implosively into the longitudinal array, the Jed eye, literally. And last slide for this series. 11 different times it was measured when more than 1 million children sang the same song at the same time. The sunspots, the solar flares dramatically reduced in response to 1 million children singing together. 11 times that was measured. Now, I just ask you to meditate for just a moment on what would the physics be of the fact that the sun goes, ah, when over 1 million children are singing the same song together. Why does the sun go, ah? It's been measured 11 times. Somebody should ask the question. I say it's because the sun needs what millions of children make together, which is the centripetal force that enables star birth. Yes, we are to be sun gods if we get centripetal, and the stars desperately need us to do that. Okay, that's my happily ever after. Thank you. What do you think?
When we connect, we're building right now communities. We're building, and the more connection that we can do together, that's when we make this realm smile.
We get centripetal together, and that's called oneness. And that also became our peaceuniversity.net, the physics of peacemaking project. Physics of peacemaking is simple. Who's getting centripetal? The magnetic lines collapse when war breaks out. You repair the magnetic lines, restore the fractality, then village A no longer fights village B. That's the restoration of fractality, which implosive centripetal force is the only definition of peacemaking. Brainwaves, geobiology, heart waves, it's all the same physics. Restored centripetal force, that negentropy is the only definition of peacemaking, peaceuniversity.net, and that is practical and teachable and measurable.
Yeah.
Okay, happily ever after 101.
When we can connect, we can build, and we can be one.
Amen.
Thank you, our headmaster Dan. As always, you've built these pillars for us to be in awe in. I love you.
Thank you, Russ. We had fun. Let's be a shareable wave. Blessings, everybody. Bye. Bye.
Bye.